For the past 3 years, Bulgaria has been consumed by political gridlock. Since Boyko Borisov was voted out in April 2021, Bulgaria has suffered through an astonishing 6 elections in 3 years. During this time, the anti-corruption Liberal opposition came to power, but failed to form a government multiple times, and now it looks like their run may be over, paving the way for more nationalist parties to take their place. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why, after 3 years, Bulgaria still doesn't have a stable government, track the rise and fall of the anti-corruption opposition, and explain why the most recent elections this June suggest that Bulgaria's long-running political crisis is far from over. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with some context. This crisis started after the elections in April 2021, when the incumbent right-wing GERB party failed to win enough seats in order to form a stable coalition. GERB was led by Boyko Borisov, a former mayor of Sofia and personal guard to Todor Zhivkov, who effectively ruled Bulgaria from 1954 until 1989. Now, Borisov originally came to power on an anti-corruption platform, but once he got into power, he ended up being pretty corrupt himself. After Hungary, Bulgaria is ranked the lowest among the 27 EU member states in Transparency International's 2023 Corruption Index. And the Center for the Study of Democracy, a Sofia think tank, found in a 2019 report that at least 35% of public procurement contracts involved corrupt practices. Anti-corruption campaigners have long focused on the mafia's involvement in bits of the public sector, including the security services and courts. In fact, in 2020, the country was engulfed in a massive wave of anti-mafia protests, demanding Borisov's resignation, as well as that of the country's chief prosecutor, Ivan Geshev, seen by many Bulgarians as a leading defender of the mafia. Protesters also called for the prosecution of Delian Pivsky, a mafia bigwig and sanctioned oligarch who has significant control over the security services, with deep links to Borisov and his GERB party. Anyway, following on from these mass protests, 3 elections were called in 2021, in April, July, and November. Now, this period marked the rise and fall of new anti-corruption parties, more commonly known as the Reformists, and the increasing political polarization of the country. Now, the first reformist party which emerged from this civil unrest was the ITN, led by television host and singer Slavy Trifonov. Trifonov actually came second in the April 2021 elections, before winning in July. Then came the PP party, led by 2 Harvard grads, nicknamed the Harvards, who won in the November 2021 elections. However, both of these reformist parties failed to either form or lead a government, especially amid skyrocketing gas prices triggered by the war in Ukraine and a wider cost of living crisis. Now, following all of these elections, disillusionment with the reformist parties hit a high, and their collapse paved the way for the return of Borisov and his GERB party, who ended up winning a plurality at the October 2022 elections. Elections were then held again the following April, though, after GERB failed to form a government with the reformist opposition, which, if we're keeping count, amounts to 5 elections in the space of 2 years. The April elections then saw GERB and the reformists coming neck and neck, but this time round they were able to form a rotational government, in which the reformist candidate would lead the government for a period of 9 months, while GERB's candidate would serve as deputy. Then, after 9 months, the two would switch roles. On paper, the two sides agreed on a pro-European agenda and set goals to integrate Bulgaria into the Eurozone and provide more support for Ukraine. But while Western media largely portrayed this coalition as a success, celebrating the two for putting their differences aside and ending Bulgaria's political crisis, this optimism wasn't shared among the Bulgarian electorate. Many Liberal voters felt betrayed by the reformists, who rose to prominence promising to overthrow Borisov, but then ended up forming a government with him. Voters were also skeptical of GERB's role in the rotational government, and doubted that the coalition was actually formed on mutual agreements of policy, but rather as a vehicle to keep Borisov out of legal trouble. This is because a few months before the government was actually formed, Borisov fell out with his once close ally, the country's general prosecutor, Ivan Geshev. For years, Geshev and the judiciary shielded Borisov from prosecution, But after the two fell out, Borisov feared that he no longer had his protection. As a result, Borisov had no choice but to participate in the new government, as failing to do so would result in Borisov losing his deputy immunity and facing prosecution. However, after the first 9-month rotation ended, Gerb's candidate failed to form a cabinet, which led to the collapse of the government. The Reformist Alliance largely blamed this on Delampivsky, the mafia kingpin we mentioned at the start, because he apparently pressured Gerb to derail coalition talks. The opposition argued that Pivsky had promised to protect Borisov from prosecution if Borisov derailed the reformist anti-corruption policy agenda, allowing Pivsky to maintain his grip on the courts. Anyway, another snap election was then called on the 9th of June this year, the 6th election in the last 3 years. Now, Gerb won with about 24% of the vote, and the reformists dropped to 3rd place, losing 25 seats. In 2nd place came the Movement for Rights and Freedoms, or MRF, with 16% of the vote, a party which represents the Roma and Turkish population, which up until now had never received more than 13% of the vote. But these results do paint a worrying picture for the future of Bulgaria. Firstly, it's becoming increasingly possible that another election may very well be on the horizon, because although Gerb won the election with around 24% of the vote, Borisov failed to secure a parliamentary majority. While it does have the backing of the MRF, which would give Borisov 115 of the 121 seats needed to form a government, the reformists have all rejected his mandate. This is largely because, as of February, Pivsky currently leads the MRF, the first non-Turkish lawmaker to do so. However, Borisov could alternatively form a minority government, but a Borisov-Pivsky coalition would be deeply controversial and struggle to find support in parliament. Furthermore, among this chaos of multiple governments collapsing and new elections being called every couple of months, voter turnout has now dropped to just 33%, its lowest in 30 years. The political shortcomings of the pro-EU parties, as well as the EU's failure to do anything about the continued large-scale corruption in Bulgaria, much of it involving abuse of EU funds, has largely given way to both Euroscepticism and new nationalist parties. Recent data shows that only 52% of Bulgarians trust the EU, a significant decline from just a few years ago. And the nationalist revival is slowly usurping the reformists as the main opposition. Together with the soft Eurosceptic BSP and ITN parties, this Eurosceptic bloc now represents about 37% of the voting electorate. If you want to learn more, then check out Too Long, our 60-page, high-quality magazine full of TLDR's very best journalism. This issue is focused on the UK election, diving deep into the campaign, the results, and how the winners plan to fix Britain. It's more than just Britain, though, with stories including the European parliamentary elections, the countries likely to join the EU next, the latest from Gaza, the rise of Milei, and, of course, the US election. Now, we've decided to make the magazine for 2 reasons. Firstly, it allows our journalists to write in more detail, diving deeper and ignoring algorithmic restrictions to produce the best work we can. And secondly, it's a good way for you to support TLDR and will help us to produce free YouTube videos as long as we can. If you're interested, then you can pick up a copy from our website, where we're selling 2 editions of the magazine. Firstly, there's the standard edition, and then there's the premium edition, which gets your name printed in the thank you section of the magazine, access to our behind-the-scenes podcast, and exclusive access to our election night livestream, where we'll be reacting to the exit poll with you as it happens. Oh, and by the way, we're going to be making an issue of Too Long every 4 months. So if you want to ensure that you never miss an issue, then you can subscribe, which gets you a 25% discount. If you have more questions, there's a full Q&A linked in the description, where you'll also find a link to our store. And while you're there, make sure you use the code ELECTIONWEEK to get an additional £2 off any purchase. Thanks so much for hearing me out, and if you are interested, please do pick up a copy, as it's a great way to support our journalism and help us to continue making free YouTube videos as long as we can.